Have you wondered what financial advisors actually think about finances? This is your sneak peek at the conversations within Financial Design Studio. Michelle Smallenberger, the CEO here, will be your host as you go behind the designs.
All right, thanks for joining us today. This is Behind the Designs, and I am your host, Michelle Smallenberger. We love to share the conversations we have internally with our team and with other professionals so that you understand how to make the best decisions with your money. Today, I want to welcome back to the mic Trevor. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to be here.
Yeah, Trevor Meyer is also a partner here at Financial Design Studio, which is going to be a fun topic because we're kind of talking about something that we've done and are doing. So one thing that I hear from, it's interesting, a lot of potential new clients and new clients, one thing I hear that in one way has almost been like added to the American dream is starting a business. And a lot of people today also have like a side job or a side gig or side hustle, whatever you want to call it. And people also have hobbies that they may say, well, in retirement, I'm going to do more of these hobbies. So we're going to talk about this topic because a lot of people are kind of having this idea of potentially starting a business. And if you're going to do this, managing and knowing how to manage your finances as a business owner is really important. Sometimes your business stays small and then sometimes it grows really large, but we want to just kind of help you think through the financial piece of this in both circumstances. Kind of as a business owner, now you almost have like two sets of books, your business and your personal finances. And that changes how you may view or kind of function within your personal finances. So we want to just kind of help you think through some of these pieces that would change if you do decide to move in this direction. And then also just kind of share some stories when we were starting ours, just to kind of, as we say, these are questions you should think through. We'll kind of share some insight from when we were doing that same thing. So we actually have started, both Trevor and I have started our own businesses, and that's why we're here today. And so we thought we would share some of our perspectives when it comes to this topic. So hopefully you'll kind of get to know us a little bit better as well. But we're just going to start kind of big picture and just ask the question, why did we start our own businesses? That's one of the biggest questions I think, we ask people is, why do you want to do this? It's really important. Trevor, do you mind, starting and kind of sharing, why did you, when you initially started your own business, why was that?
One of those things that there's a surface level answer, right? And then when you start unpacking it, you really kind of get to the nitty and gritty of what was actually most important, right? So for me, when I found and developed my love for financial planning, which was in college, I started looking at what is my future career path and trajectory going to look like. And I knew pretty early on that at some point I wanted to be an owner in a financial planning firm. In fact, on my wall, I had a list of goals. And one of those things was to be an owner in a successful financial planning firm. Never mind the fact that I didn't know how I would define successful, but it was one of those things that that was one of my life goals, right? So fast forward a couple of years as I'm getting into the workforce, I took a job here out in Chicagoland and worked for another firm owner. And essentially started evaluating and realizing that over time, while the expectation and internally, I should say, on me was that I would start buying into the practice and taking it over, I don't think that was necessarily perceived the other way around. So that's some fault on my own end. But I basically got to a point to say, well, if I knew I wanted to be an owner in a successful financial planning firm, well, I need to go be owner in a successful financial planning firm. And the first step there is to start your own firm. So for me, it was one of those things to say, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to go out and start my own firm and stop working for someone else. So that's kind of the big picture. When you start digging in though, why did I actually really want to do that beyond just a checkbox on a list of goals? For me, it really kind of came down to just having the flexibility with, hey, how do I want to pick and choose to spend my time? When you're working for someone else, it's really hard to say, hey, in the middle of the day, I just want to go do something with my kids or go do something with my wife or take some free time to, pick up and do an activity that, you wouldn't thought they'd be able to do otherwise. It's harder. There's a different emotional pull there. And when you own your own business, it's much easier to make that decision. However, it's also really important to note that when you do make that decision as an owner, that means generally speaking, there's going to be work that on the back end you have to make up somewhere else, right? So having that flexibility with time is really key and critical for me. And then just again, from the family aspect of if I'm looking at an asset I want to build for the future for my family, to me, that was a really good financial decision as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great answer. And I do want to kind of clarify. Do you ever feel like when people kind of say you want flexibility to be able to do what you want, do you feel like you want to clarify and it's like, okay, most of the time you are working like 9 to 5. So it's not like, you want this ability to have the dream life. It's just, it's very hard to be in a business that someone else owns and not feel like you're being judged when you're working every hour that you need to and you're getting everything done that needs to get done. But if you go out for a walk for an hour or two at lunch, it's like, it's hard to not feel like that's being perceived as something that it isn't. And so I think that can be something, even just that feeling of the perception from others, for me was really like, that was kind of a piece of that. Do you ever feel like people are like, oh, you just wanted to be able to do what you want? Or no, you're like, nope, this is what I wanted.
Yeah, I've actually had some jokes with friends when we over breakfast and stuff like that where, Trevor can just pop out whenever he wants. Well, not really, especially if we have other client meetings, but time and time again, like, yes, I can make time available for breakfast in the morning or, lunch and stuff like that for, connecting and building those relationships at the cost of, generally speaking, that means I'm working later into the evening or a lot of times picking up things on the weekend, and which I'm perfectly fine with. I'm not complaining. It's just an intentional decision with which I've started to make. So.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe a good way to kind of to explain this to people who may be thinking the same thing. The work still has to get done. So it's not that you're working less. You're just maybe choosing, I'm going to be working maybe at a different time. There is certain behind the scenes work that does not have to get done, when the market's open or things like that. There are always things in your business you're trying to make better. You're trying to write an article. You're trying to record a podcast. That can be done at any time in the day. So that's where it's like all of those things, that's what fills up your normal time when you're working in someone else's business. And so when it's their business, they want that flexibility for themselves too. So just hear some of that, not necessarily the I want what I want, and so I'm going to go do what I want. It's more of that and being intentional with your time, because we do know our kids are small and that only happens once. So ours was very similar to you, Steve and I. One of the things, and we're going to get into, kind of the why we started, it was very similar to you, kind of that flexibility. I wanted to start kind of writing more, doing things like that. I knew that was needed for marketing. And so I wanted to step into that. And when I say that perception from everybody else, you might be out for the day writing 4 articles, but everybody else doesn't know that. And again, they think, oh, you just have the day off, when you're actually doing really productive work that for marketing is going to bring in more clients. And so I think I just kind of always struggled, that was kind of some of the struggle was, I know I need to be doing higher level work that I really need to focus on. And that looks like it's, needs to be done out of the office to really be able to do that. And so just some of that perception, I think I just started to think through and, okay, well, what does this look like? Well, if I'm doing these things and I know how to grow a business, we know that we could start a business. And so I think some of those thoughts of knowing that you could do that start to come in. So for you and I, we were like, we have this why, we're going to start it. Now, there are some people that I have heard, they have these side gigs and they want to turn it into a business. They want it to be bigger. But also people who have hobbies. I have heard people with hobbies say, well, I could turn this into a business. But they're really glad that they didn't, because they wouldn't enjoy doing it anymore, because they would feel like they have to, because someone's now paying them to do it. And they're like, well, now I have to get this order done. These are just some things to think about. If you all, you want to enjoy it, do you want this to be a job? How is this that you want this to play in your life?
Yeah, I mean, specifically on that point of, hey, having a hobby or the gig economy and stuff like that, I think the gig economy is real, right? And I think it is going to be something that's going to influence how people go about their working lives in the future. So lots of little like part-time jobs will come to be more commonplace. But especially honing in on that hobby side of things, I think one of the things that's really hard to do is just to say, hey, you may be really good at something. Let's just pick on woodworking. I follow a lot of woodworking YouTube channels, and I like woodworking myself. So I like building things and working through it. But if I were to step back and look at that and say, would I ever want this to be a business? And I think for me, and because I've been through the process of building a business before, I think the answer would be no if I was trying to do a woodworking business. And the reason why is because, great, I love woodworking. I love seeing the formation of something coming together. But some of the things that I don't exceptionally love doing are dealing with the marketing, or dealing with, having to run books and making sure tax payments are taken care of, and making sure you're running through the appropriate tool maintenance to work through things. If you looked at my shop downstairs, it's in a state of disarray because it's really hard to keep up with all the maintenance that needs to get done. And anytime you're running a business, you have to be as efficient as possible in order to really kind of make it as fruitful as possible for you and your family. So,
do you ever, kind of like you watch some of these shows where they're kind of like starting out, and it could be in anything like woodworking, home building, home renovation, something. And you kind of see the point where someone goes from this was like a fun hobby thing that they're doing. And then all of a sudden, like a new season of the show doesn't come out because they have now made this like a serious business and they don't have time to do as much of this. And then some do continue doing it. But it's interesting. You can see like this point where it goes from kind of like this hobby or fun thing they're doing to like a full-fledged business, and where you take it seriously. And I think that's where it's kind of that different. So now we're going to talk about, I think this is kind of like a line in the sand where you say, this is what you have to think through in the beginning. Is this just going to be something fun, something I enjoy doing, or do I want to turn this into the job that's going to support our families, the business that I'm going to pour all of my time and resources into? And so now, we have this why we want to do it, but you've got to have other things too. So when you are getting ready to start your business, what do you feel like? This is kind of this reality check, right? We're entrepreneurs, we're dreamers. It can be, we want it to be, but you also got to have this reality check of, can this really work? Can this really support our family? What do I need? So those kind of things. What do you feel like you had, that you said, okay, I have all of these things. I could do this.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was one of those things that my family structure, my wife also works. She's a nurse in the ER at a local hospital here. And from a financial perspective, that was a huge blessing, right? Because it was an additional income that didn't meet all of our living expenses, but it basically met a big bulk and majority of them at the time. And for the gap, we basically said, okay, I know that at some point I'm going to want to do this. So we aggressively saved to, kind of have a pot of money with which we could live off of while, the business was, starting to pick up. But I think for me, the other things trying to think about of before I actually quote unquote pulled the lever and said, hey, let's go ahead and start. It was one of those things that say, was I actually personally ready? Was I actually ready to say, hey, I'm going to take on the marketing aspects. I'm going to take on managing and running my own books. I'm going to take on this. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to say, acknowledge the things that you're not good at doing. But if you're going to be a business owner, you have to do something. Because if you don't, you're essentially just going to be treading water, right? And for me, internally, I knew that I could actually find ways to efficiently get things done, right? So whether it was building scripts and code to, efficiently move documents around or file things or manage and walk clients through the onboarding process and managing the relationship, I could work through that. That made sense to me. What didn't make sense to me was, well, how are you going to find the new clients? And that's for me, I had to find the resources and the tools and the people that I would say, how can you help me do this? Because I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that mental of I'm ready to commit all of this time to start this business, because there's a lot of time that you put into it in the beginning just to like let the world know I exist.
Yeah.
And the other things, I think those are great things. And like you mentioned, even if you're not good at it or you aren't sure how to do it, you have to realize there are some things you can outsource. So those are things where you might have said, well, I don't need to do this, but I could pay someone to do this. And okay, I can do that. And then I'm going to focus my time on this. So you will absolutely have things like that because you can't do 100% of everything eventually. other big ones that I think of were kind of like experience. And you had these experience working in a business. So you knew what it was like working with clients, over several years through market cycles, experience knowledge. So you saw what it was like to have a business, what processes were needed. Those were a lot of the things that I really felt like, okay, I have experience. When I started from the ground up, kind of working in a firm, doing paperwork and things like that. So I got to see a lot of the back office pieces, then working up to where I was focusing more of my time on, okay, how do I now bring in new clients? And so I thought, all of that knowledge, I'm like, oh, okay, I know how to run a business. I know how to choose softwares and which ones, are good or won't, work as well as I want them to. It was stuff like that where I felt like the business management I knew and could decide pretty quickly. So those pieces, it was like, okay, we know we're kind of already, in little pieces running a business. We're doing the pieces we're going to have to do. So we're just now going to go do that more. Now, this is different if you're someone who's like right out of college and you're thinking, I want to start a business. That's very different because you wouldn't have that experience and that, business knowledge necessarily, but you might have a lot of energy and you might not have high bills and you might not have a family yet. So that's why I say, like, what did we have? Those were things that we felt helped us start our business off well. But other people are going to have different things. But it's think through, what are those things you have? Do I have time? Do I have enough money saved up? And I think those are really important pieces. And for everybody, they're going to be different. And I do think today there's a lot of organizations that can help you get businesses set up quickly that were not around a long time ago. So that does make this different. And so hopefully just these kind of major questions people are thinking through and saying, yep. And if you get to that question and you can say, here's my answers, and I still want to do it, that's just giving you kind of some insight to say, okay, then maybe I should do this. So if you can work through these questions and not get stopped in your tracks, you might be onto something.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things you mentioned is, starting a business is just how are you going to fund it? Right? How are you going to actually come up with the money? Because a lot of times it takes money to purchase the software that you're going to do or purchase tools. It very much depends what kind of business you're looking at or going after. But you need some capital with which to be able to start. And the good news is that there are lots of resources that you can use to help with that financing if you don't already have money saved up. I tend to take the approach as if you are able to save up money before you go ahead and start the business, do that because it's a lot cheaper from a capital perspective. But I would say the bigger expense that oftentimes really gets overlooked is how are you going to fund yourself, right? Because the business, there are lots of things that you can run a business on a very, very tight and lean budget. That's even something that I did personally when I started my business. But the harder expense for us was, well, how am I going to afford to live? And for me, it was helpful in the fact that my wife had income coming in and we had other savings. But once you figure out that nut and figure out how to crack it and say, here's how I'm going to live and fund my living expenses for whatever your runway is, right? So whether it's 2 years, 3 years, generally 3 years is the time period with which a lot of businesses start to become profitable. So how are you going to fill that stopgap between now and 3 years from now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point, is how much to have saved. So maybe it's that 3 to 5 year kind of window. Yeah, that was the thing. And I think that also gives you kind of this timeline where you're like, my business has to start being profitable or start being successful within this time frame. So you're kind of also setting like a time limit of, I'm going to give it a couple years or 3 years. And if it doesn't work after that, that was kind of the other point we got to, was worst case, we just go back to a firm doing what we're doing, making what we were making, but we have more experience. So it was that's another real question, is what's the worst case scenario? It doesn't work out. And you're like, okay, worst case, I go back to this and I don't hate this. It's just, I want to try it. I think we can do this. And so that's where, yeah. But that is another good point that you made. It's something that we thought through. Give yourself enough of a runway to let your business fly if it's going to, but you're also kind of setting that timeline of saying it has to do this by then, or we're going to do this. So
you're starting to sound like me, Michelle, when you say worst case scenario. So
I know, right?
That's funny.
Everybody watch out. So this is one of the hardest things. And that's why we're kind of setting this up in this way, is there's kind of like this big reality check, think through all of these things, because then after this, you're kind of at this point where, okay, now we know we're ready to. Are there any other, I guess, before we kind of take this leap and say, yep, we're doing this. I've decided I'm going to start my business. And now we're going to talk about all of that going forward. any other risks that you would say, kind of that people should think about? I think kind of that worst case scenario covers it, but having that in mind, like if this doesn't work, what will I do? Any other risks you can think about that people should just be cautious of when they're starting?
Yeah, I mean the only other one that comes to mind immediately for me is the strain and stress that you'll have on relationships and even on your own health, right? I like to joke that I started getting my gray hair when I actually started my own business, and it's only continued, right? Now it's a factor of stress, it's a factor of age and whatnot, but there is something real about the fact that when you have everything on your shoulders, you're looking at things from a very different perspective than if you have a job description and you're focused on that, right? So when I step back and look at the stress and the strain that some relationships and even your own health can have, to me, it's one of those things where there is a risk in that of, hey, some of those things falling off. You need to make sure from a relationship perspective, if you're married, that your spouse is on board. I'm fully convinced that, doing this, starting a business without the support of your spouse is really not advisable, right? Because the number one cheerleader in your corner ought to be your spouse, and encouraging you and supporting you and stepping through that. And I can only speak from my own perspective, but my wife was immensely helpful in that regard. So.
Yeah. And I think if you so that's what we kind of talked about, like setting this time, like we're going to give it this amount of time, but financially, we're going to give it this amount of money. Like, I think that's another limit. And those are two things I think that you have to come up with together. So if you are married, if you have kids, those are things like this is a family decision. And there's some times where, just like if you're in another job, there's going to be times where you might have to say, hey, mom, dad, I got to work, and the kids understand that, but also it's something you can get excited about too when you're all in it together. So
100%.
That is really cool. All right. So now that we've talked about kind of the risks and what you should be thinking of, I would say if you are an entrepreneur and you're that dreamer mindset and it's hard for you to kind of think realistically about things sometimes, especially something like this that's exciting, find a friend, family member, someone who can ask you these questions and ask multiple people. I know we had several conversations, and not like right before we started our business, but just with friends over the years of asking them, like, how important is financial planning to you? How important, like, is there value in these things? We would just ask questions like this. As if you're like testing out being a business owner. So think if you're someone who's like has a product, you're going to create a product that you're going to try and sell, or you have some other type of service, whatever it is, ask people. Have a reality check so that when you go into this, you know that there is a demand for it. Or just watch Shark Tank and then answer all of those questions, and they can kind of give you this reality check. But you have to have that at some point before you get started, just to say, is this really something that can fly or not? So if you have now moved past all of these things, now we're going to start to talk about here's what to think about when you're setting up your books, your business, how it impacts your personal finances. Now that you're going to be a business owner, it's like, okay, now the reality of dealing with these things, we're going to start to talk about next. So the biggest piece, which we've kind of started a little bit, is managing your own finances. So in light of now I'm trying to build this business that has income coming in, it has expenses going out. How do you manage your personal finances, kind of especially in those early days, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it starts even before day one or day zero, right? It starts years prior to that. And I think one of the things that we work with clients directly on, not necessarily that are looking to start businesses, but just as a form of habit, is what are your own personal living expense and savings structures and methods looking like? Because someone that wants to go out and start a business, if they're not already in the habit of saving money, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, well, it's going to be exceptionally hard for them to say, well, now I'm not going to have this income stream coming in, and I'm waiting 3, if not 4 or 5 years before I'm going to have more equivalent income coming back in, right? So that's a very different discussion versus the same person that would be, or the same type of person that would be looking to save or looking to start a business, and they are already saving 20% plus of their income. Well, now that's a much different conversation, because that person that's already saving their income, hey, great, this is something that you want to go out and start a business. you're not already living 100% of your pay. You're only living on 80%, right? So that living expense number is much, much easier. Oh, and by the way, now you have a pot of money to live off of while your business is getting up and running. So from a behavioral, from a monthly basis, you essentially want to make sure that you're personally saving on a regular basis, knowing that after you stop or after you start your business, you may stop that saving for a short time period. But again, you want to get back into that regular rhythm. I think for after day zero, after day one, when you're actually in the mode of starting your business, you just want to be really mindful of every expense that's really going to go out. I'm a penny pincher, if you will. So I especially even in our own business, when we come up with big spending decisions or whatnot, I'm probably very, very hesitant and I want to look at all the detail before I'm actually saying, hey, let's go ahead and spend this money. But the reality is you've got to balance that equation with, well, if you need to spend money in order to get a new tool that's going to save you a tremendous amount of time, well, you need to spend the money. But you also need to, again, as you were mentioning, bounce that off with close relationships to say, hey, does this make sense? And, just does it pass the vibe check more or less? So.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So it kind of sounds like, and I would agree, you have to have your personal finances in order. Mm-hmm. And like you said, whether you're saving for 2 or 3 years before then, or you've just been saving and now that's going towards starting this business, it's knowing that you've got that set aside. And I think even too, like in the beginning, kind of setting your expenses really to the lowest that they can be so that hey, we're going to live on this, because income is not guaranteed. I don't know if you felt like when you started your business, I mean, we didn't have any clients. We were like, we know they're going to come with us and they're, when we start this, they're coming. Like we just assumed we're building it from zero day one. And they're like, okay, as people hear, as we put our website out there, and if people call, and you hope they do, but nothing's guaranteed. And so it's almost like set yourself up to live on the least that you can. And then as income comes in, then you can slowly add things back in. But in order to do this, like you were saying, sometimes you have to spend money. So let's assume that someone has not saved a lot of money. What is another way that they could get funding for their business if, they don't have a lot saved?
Yeah. So again, limiting your own expenses is always one, but it's sure, everybody's going to tell you that, right? If you don't spend money, then you don't need to use money, but that's not always super helpful. I think in terms of actual functionally helpful, what would be worthwhile to go look at is there are a number of different financing options that can provide you lines of credit with which you can use in the business. The SBA has a number of different resources. But one of the things to be mindful of is, okay, let's say you take a loan out for money. Well, you're going to have to not only pay that loan back, but you're also going to have to pay back the interest, right? So now you're in a way, you're biding yourself time with which, income can be coming in, but you're actually digging that hole a little bit deeper just with the interest that gets accumulated on that loan. Again, not saying it's a bad idea. In fact, I think there's a lot of ways with which you can use financing to leverage and grow your business in a really substantial and powerful way. But it is one of those things to be mindful of. It's not just as if, hey, I'm going to take $20,000 and I'm only going to pay $20,000 back. You're going to pay a lot more than $20,000 back. So I think financing using banks, SBA loans, stuff like that is a viable option. Another one which is possible, I'm not as big of a fan of this, but it is possible, is using friends and family to say, hey, you have people that are surrounding you and supporting you and want the best for you. Well, if starting a business and going out on your own and doing this is something that's really purposeful and intentional and it's going to help in the future, well, a lot of times those in our lives want to support us in that regard as well. So that is an option. The reason I am not a big fan of that is because I tend to find that essentially as you evolve money in terms of any sort of personal relationship, things just can tend to get strained. And it's one of those things, well, I thought this and I thought that and whatnot. So if you're going to go down that route, I am very convinced and I'm quite adamant. In fact, I've had a number of friends that have talked me through this. Oh, my parents or my in-laws are going to help me with this portion and this and that. I'm like, okay, that's great. Get it in writing, right? And verbal conversations over the dinner table are not helpful. because perspectives change. And unless it's written down and you both agree, hey, here's what I understand, here's what I understand, here's what the document is, the document needs to overrule all of that. So.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, if loved ones are contributing to it, they may feel like they can contribute opinions or help, or, it's kind of like, where is the line? Like, oh, I want your money, but not your opinion. Like, that's probably not a great thing to say, but I think those are the things that kind of can come with that. It's something that I thought of as we were talking about this. When you set up your business, so you have your personal finances and now you have this business, and it's really important actually to keep them separate.
Oh, yes.
So for example, you're saying, I want to start this business. I want to launch this great idea, but you don't want your personal finances to suffer because of it. And there's actually a lot of ways where that can happen. So for example, let's say that you're the person that hasn't saved. And now you're saying, okay, I've got a line of credit, or I've got credit cards or whatever. I'm just going to depend on debt to finance all of this. And so now you're accumulating all of this debt. Well, if the business goes under, you still are personally responsible for those if you're just using your personal cards. One of the things that's very important is to actually, start your business, set things up with the business, because you want it to be such that if the business flops, the business flops, like it just goes away and stops, and you don't have all of this other, personal debt now because of that you have to pay off. So this is why it is important to save money, to set things aside, but also to kind of have this line of, my business finances are in this account, my personal finances are in this account. It's also very easy to track, but it's very important so that you don't go under because your business went under. So I think that's a really important distinction too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, just from a tracking perspective. It might be harder to keep two things separate, but there's a lot of value in it. Not just from the onset, but even down the road after things have been much more successful, in terms of, okay, how profitable is the business? Because now you're not introducing personal expenses with business ones. I will say one of the things that has kind of always bugged me is the whole QuickBooks Self-Employed, and not to rag on any particular company, but we've had clients that have used QuickBooks Self-Employed before in the past. And one of the toutings of Self-Employed version is that, you can just do all in one place and mark certain transactions as personal and certain ones as business. Well, if you're really on top of that and you can keep that focused in terms of, hey, this is personal and that's business, great. I mean, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, it's really hard and those lines get blurred. So the second that those lines get blurred, well, now how do you actually have good metrics to look at the future finances of your business, to really make good decisions, well informed? So.
Well, and so even just in our business, when we're doing this, we have business credit cards and personal credit cards. So if there's something we need to buy, that goes on the business card. So it's very clear, you're not making yourself do a bunch more work to track it. So it is important, set them up differently. And you might find that it takes a little bit before you can set up that business card, because you've got to actually build up credit, or, be established for a little bit potentially. But just that's when we're saying, practically speaking, like, set them up so you have separate cards, separate accounts for them.
Even from a legal perspective, because one of those things where I would hear is a potential, well, I don't actually have the business written up, and I don't have the the LLC written up, or the S corp and stuff like that, and we'll get into some of the details there. But regardless, even if you don't have that set up, just use a brand new bank account. Right, that's an easy way to do it. Now, you're not getting the liability protection. Again, we'll get into that, I'm sure, in just a little bit. But at a bare minimum, you're looking at things where, hey, this is all business expense. So you're getting in that mode. You're getting in that habit of, how do I properly run the finances of my business, so that when you do have that official business paperwork, the LLC, the S corp, or maybe even a C corp set up, now you're just moving from that business account that you're already tracking separately to the actual official legal business account.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things, kind of as we want to share experiences here so that you can kind of get an inside look of some of this stuff. As we've even gone out, we have an office space, but we've always thought about, well, should we get our own office space that we can build out? And we would love to be able to do that. And there's been a few times where we've looked at different spaces, but one of the things that they actually require and ask is a personal commitment from the business owner for the lease of the space. So if it's going to be a 3, 5, 10-year lease, they want you to personally commit to paying that. And that's been something where we say, wait, like if our business didn't make it, I don't want to be on the hook for 7 more years of paying this lease personally for a business that doesn't exist. And so this is kind of what we mean when we say separate it out. Don't make yourself personally responsible for something if your business doesn't make it. So this is kind of the stuff that over time you start to see, and you may be faced with these decisions. Now, you may be a person, the business you're starting, you need a storefront on day one. So that's something you're going to have to think through. But these are the types of pieces. This is how you start to commingle your business and your personal finances. And you really have to be intentional to say, wait, I don't want to personally be responsible if this doesn't work. So that's what we kind of mean when we say set them up separately too. So now that your business is kind of growing, you have some income coming in. Let's talk about the next big one. How do we balance, growing our salary or what we're taking home versus reinvesting in our business? This is, like you said, this can be a hard one because to make our business better, grow faster, grow differently, we could maybe need more money, but at the same time, we want to be taking money home to start, or maybe being able to live a little bit more than the rice and beans we were putting ourselves on in the beginning. How do you kind of think about that change over time or even starting?
Yeah, I tend to think of don't bring money home unless you have to, really. So you want to be reinvesting in the business because if we were to really look at across our client base, generally speaking, a lot of the clients that we work with build wealth in really kind of one of two categories. Either they live well below their means, and so they're saving really, really aggressively, or two, they have ownership in something, whether it's a small business, real estate potentially even, or even ownership in their own companies, right? So when you have ownership there that you can help direct and drive the control of, it's a way to build financial wealth. Now, I say financial wealth because it's, that's not the end all be all. But one of the things to keep in mind is if you're able to keep funds in the business, you're able to allow those funds to grow and multiply much more than you would of being able to go out to restaurants more frequently or maybe go on a vacation or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, to be perfectly clear, I'm not saying, hey, you need to continue to starve yourself and live off beans and weenies and whatnot for indefinite time periods, but you do have to find that happy medium to say, where is that point going to be for us in terms of, hey, I can reinvest this versus I really want to bring this home, or my family really is looking forward to this something because we've been working so hard for so long. Get it. So let's make sure we're reinvesting in your family. It's going to be a different decision for everyone. But as a general rule of thumb, if you can keep the funds within the business and allow those to reinvest and build back into even greater and better things for your business, you're going to be better off. I think Warren Buffett even has a line too of, essentially where could you get a dividend paying stock and stuff like that and take home the money? Yeah, sure. But you're going to be far better off if you go ahead and get that dividend paying stock and just let those dividends buy more shares, And as those shares build upon the others, now you're actually just, using the leverage of compound interest to work in your favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, talking about a business that is growing in value too. So you can be growing the income, but at the same time, so as a business owner, you're trying, I think one of the main goals is you want to be able to earn what you should be able to earn doing the job that you're doing, whether you're doing it for yourself or whether you're doing it for someone else. So kind of what is this market salary? What is this market pay that I, should be getting for the skills that I have and the experience that I have? So that can be like your first, okay, I want to get to that point. And then you get beyond this, but even along that way, you're saying, well, if I got this tool or this machine, or if I got this service and implemented that would allow me to get twice as much faster. And so it's these kind of decisions that can make that hard. I think this is where if you're a solo business owner, again, it's having your spouse, your family on board so that those conversations are not hard. Some things that we're kind of starting to talk about are just like having a percentage of knowing what percent of our budget is going towards different areas so that, this is set aside for this expense this year, and however it's going to be used, each of us are going to be responsible for different areas, but those funds are dedicated for that. So as you grow, you start to be able to maybe put things in place where you can make those decisions a little bit easier. But I think in the beginning, it can be hard. So you really want to weigh how is this going to benefit me versus if I take this home, do we need it? When we talk about getting paid a salary, that's just like if you're working in someone else's business, you're getting a paycheck. So you've got these payroll taxes, being deducted from that. You want to be deducting, your federal, state income tax, all of that. Versus, if there's excess and you say, okay, I'm getting my salary, but there's still some extra in the business. There's still some profit. Do I want to take this out? Now it's okay. Well, do I just take that out of the business and I don't pay tax on it? You pay tax differently, but you don't have those payroll taxes on the funds. And so now, this is where as a business owner, how much am I taking out? How am I taking it out? This starts to affect the tax implications of this. So these are some of the pieces that I think, are harder. I know on day one, expenses for us that we said we want to invest into the business or reinvest, it was marketing for sure, because we were doing a lot of video. And for us, we had both left our firm. So we were like, this has to work or, so we had kind of a shorter runway of saying, we're both going to go back to work or one of us, but we said this has to work essentially. And so marketing was really big for us. And so we chose to spend money on doing that. And we saw that grow really quickly. So that was something for us. Was there anything, Trevor, when you think about your business that you said, okay, in the beginning, I'm willing to spend on this, maybe over some other areas?
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of the tools that, frankly, I was already comfortable with, right? CRM is one of the core tools that we use, the client relationship management system. And, that was one of the larger expenses for me to begin out. And the reason for that is because I knew the power in terms of the tracking, and I'm a big metrics guy, right? So I like to look at things and say, okay, how's my business stacking up against other businesses in, my same shoes, like they started recently, or maybe they're roughly the same size and whatnot. So having tools that help me understand what's the health of my business, both from a financial perspective, from a growth perspective, from a day-to-day managed operations perspective. So that was a big expense. The other big one was another kind of a network system that I became a part of. It's called XYPN, but essentially the reason that I hired them and became a part of the network or whatnot was because they offered a lot of different tools with which here's how you can file the appropriate paperwork in the appropriate places at the appropriate times to get registered. Here's what you can expect. Here's a study group that you can actually talk through these challenges with other firms in your same situation. And here are some marketing or tech discounts to say, here are the tools that a lot of other firms like to use. If you'd like to use this as well, here's a discount for that. So for me, it was really the two big expenses were kind of XYPN and then my CRM. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. So whether it's technology or something that's going to grow efficiency. Yeah, no, that's great. As we kind of talk about, I just want to touch a little bit more on this kind of salary versus distributions. One of this is it's a tough balance, and this is where you pay taxes differently depending on how you take money out of the business. So one of the benefits, if you don't have to withhold payroll taxes on that paycheck, so if you're kind of taking maybe more in distributions, but still a good amount in a paycheck, one thing to keep in mind is that paycheck that you are withholding payroll taxes on, which includes Social Security taxes, is later in life. Your Social Security benefit is based on the wages that you did withhold, Social Security taxes for. So it is important to this is kind of when we're looking for clients, the now versus the later. As a business owner, it's easy to forget because you're like, I need to take home what I can today. But also just remember, you don't want to decrease that paycheck too much to the detriment potentially of a Social Security benefit later, because Social Security does cover a decent amount of expenses. It's not meant to cover everything, but just balancing those are kind of the things you need to keep in mind. So whether you're talking with your accountant or if you have a bookkeeper, things like that are good conversations just to be mindful of when you're balancing how much income and how you take that out of the business. So
yeah, and kind of what you're talking about there is one of the big financial planning things that we help clients that have businesses kind of run through, right? Is the whole idea of salary versus distribution, and this mostly comes into play for business owners that are S corps, right? Because if you're a sole proprietor or you're an LLC and taxed as an LLC, because LLCs can also be taxed as S corps, but either way, if you're a sole proprietor or an LLC, all of the income that the business comes in, that the business brings in, is essentially going to flow through to you. And unfortunately, you're going to owe self-employment taxes on that. And that's basically both sides of the FICA tax, the 7.65. So it's a total of 15 plus percent. So, and that's not great to have to pay that tax. Whereas I think what you're alluding to there is when you are an S corp, you have the ability to say, well, my salary is this. And even if my business still brings in after my salary additional money, well, that could be considered a distribution instead of salary. But the one big key component there is always reasonable comp, because the IRS knows to say, well, just because someone's an S corp, if you're running a business and you're only paying yourself $10,000 a year to run that business, the IRS is pretty wise to say, hey, hang on, that doesn't pass the reasonable comp test, or the sniff test, if you will. But the other thing you're also alluding to is, let's say you set your salary. Let's say you're an S corp. You have $100,000 of income that's coming in, but you only set your salary at $10,000, and 90% of that, or 90,000, is distribution, not subject to the Social Security and Medicare tax or whatnot. Well, you're also hurting yourself in the future. Is in retirement years, well, now you're working off of an earned income figure of $10,000 instead of potentially 100, right? So there are multiple factors at play that you want to make sure that if I pull this lever a certain way, what's going to be the impact downstream of 3 other things? And it's really important to have conversations with trusted individuals around you to work through that. So.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things, like there is kind of an amount that when you start talking with your accountant, like they'll let you know there is a certain point that you kind of grow to, or what you're bringing in comes to where you kind of get past this. It makes sense to maybe switch from what a sole proprietorship to an S corp or something like that. So there are kind of thresholds where you get to that level. So that's why, your accountant can be helpful to kind of explain what those are.
Yeah. Just a real quick side, that's probably one of my more favorite things to do with clients that have businesses or whatnot. So Steve and I work closely on that. Steve built this wonderful, amazing tool to say, okay, here's what a tax return would look like on an LLC or self-employment side. Everything flows through. Here's what the S corp would be. But he's incorporated things like, okay, well, you're going to have increased filing costs because a S corp return costs differently than an LLC does, or you're going to have additional administrative costs. But you do get the savings from the FICA tax and stuff like that. So again, making sure you have trusted individuals, the right trusted individuals that are going to run through the detailed analysis with you to work through, well, what's going to make the most sense for you and your family.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. That's one of the things we love to do, is kind of show this side by side. That's something when we say we work with clients, we want you to be able to understand as much as you can. So it's like, let's just see it side by side. And then it's so much easier to make a decision when you can see the results of that, to know, okay, well, this just makes sense. So once we kind of get past this point and we've got salary, income coming in, now we start to think, okay, our business is maybe maturing a little bit. And so now we start to think about, well, what are other things that my business could be covering for me besides just getting a salary? Are there other things it could be paying for? And is this, financially beneficial for my business to start paying for some of these things rather than, just the salary I take home and then I pay for them personally? So what's so interesting is you're slowly building a business that maybe you were working in that when you started day one already had these things. So this next step is kind of like adding in these employee benefits that when you're hired, you already have offered to you on day one, because this is a big enough business that's hiring employees in. So this is essentially what you're doing. So now we have enough income Maybe we have some employees, maybe you don't. Maybe it's just you and you're saying, okay, I want my business to start paying some of these personal expenses like employee benefits would if I were an employee somewhere else. So maybe, I guess, kind of list some of these employee benefits that we think of, Trevor, when we say we have enough business money in the business to now maybe pay for some of these things. What are some things that you think of initially?
Yeah, so the big ones that come to mind are retirement plans, what that looks like. So if you are a single person, or maybe it's just you and your spouse that work in the business, one of the things you can look at using is a solo or an individual 401k. And the costs on setting those accounts are really, really low. The administration is really, really low. We've helped a number of different clients set those up, but they offer kind of the largest available beyond defined benefit plan. They offer the largest annual contribution limits to be able to get funds into those accounts. So in that account, you basically can save $23,000 a year in 2024. If you're over age 50, there's a catch up for $7,500. The rules are going to change pretty substantially for 2025, but only to the benefit. But you can sock away a lot of money on a pre-tax basis using that account. So retirement is a big one, but there are other options beyond a solo 401k as well. If you have owners, you can still do a 401k, but now you're introducing administrative cost for hiring the record keeper, the third-party administrator, and stuff like that. But retirement plans can still be a wonderful advantage. The next big one would probably be health insurance, and that's something that at least in the US here, we are really well trained to get our health insurance from our employers. And I know that there's been some change and some movement away from that here in the past 10 years or so. But the recognition is most people do get their health insurance either from their employer or if they're retired from Medicare, right? Now, if you're going to look at a health insurance plan with your business, now you're going to have to work with a broker to see, okay, well, what is this plan going to look like? There are some state available options that you can work through. There are different rules depending on what state you're in, but most of them are pretty well documented. But let's just say you're going to work with a broker and they're going to help you pick this insurance plan over that insurance plan or whatnot. One of the first things that's hard to think about or be mindful of is a lot of these group plans, you have to meet a certain minimum number of people before you can even enroll. And 3 has been a number that's been touted around just to get the plan started. It doesn't always have to stay at 3. But if it's just you in the business, it could be really hard to get a group health insurance plan through one of the big names, if you don't have more people covered. So the other alternative is to say, okay, can you go back to the marketplace? But that's not necessarily going through the business. So following health insurance, then we're just going to keep working down the list of disability insurance. That's something that I really encourage clients to take a look at doing, especially if you are a solo business owner, because now you're getting to the point where if you're looking at employee benefits and having your business cover them, generally speaking, your income is well enough to the point where you're not, scraping by, right? So your income is growing through the business. It's starting to become profitable. But if you're still a solo shop, now you're in a situation where if something happens to you, how are you going to continue bringing funds into your house, in the event of an accident, right? And this is an accident where you might be paralyzed or you can't work for a little bit. Disability insurance is paramount and super, super important, and I think often overlooked as an employee benefit to look at. And then the final big one I would tend to think about is just life insurance, because there can be some tax advantages with getting some life insurance through the employer, although it falls off after you increase the face amounts and whatnot. So, sorry, that's a long list, longer than you were probably expecting, but.
No, I think that's great. And I just think it's interesting because when you're working in a business for someone, there are, everybody has, you graduate college or you graduate from high school and you decide you're going to start working. And so you're either going to work for someone else or work for yourself. And there are a lot of people that say, I'm fine working for someone else. I'm good at what I do. I enjoy what I do. I just want to do that and go home at the end of the night and be able to enjoy my family, not thinking about work, not bringing work home, as people might say it. And then there are other people that say, I love what I do. I want to, work for myself. I know I can run a business. I can do this well. I want to be able to do that from wherever that is, if that's at home or if that's in an office. I want to be able to choose. Everybody kind of has to decide this. but there are things that through your employer, whatever that's going to be, that there are benefits you can get. And whether you're just working for someone and you get those from your employer, these are things that your employer as a business owner are thinking through and saying, what do we offer all of you? And then there, you as a business owner are doing the same thing and saying, what can our business cover? But we also want to give and have attractive benefits too, to attract good employees, or, for us to make this something that we can keep working in and being covered. So all of those things I think that you mentioned are perfect. Like that's the order of, kind of those things where it's like, hey, these also then benefit the tax side of your business. So this is why, as we start adding on these things now, benefits, you're kind of adding on, okay, there's some tax planning that goes into this too. And one of the things that you mentioned with like disability is that there's studies that show people are more likely to become disabled than to die. And so that's why disability insurance is important, and it's not super expensive. So it is important to have, but isn't super expensive either. So I think some people might be surprised, but again, it's kind of adding each of these as you go. So you may not say, we're going to add all of these benefits this year. You might say, this year, we're going to start doing this. Next year, we're going to do these, So insurance would kind of probably be some of those first ones to kind of that disability to get in place so that your income is insured. And then you can start adding, maybe at the same time, 401k, life insurance, all depending on what the income of your business looks like. But I think that's a great list for people to work through.
Yeah. And I think as you're working through to say, well, how much can I afford to spend on the employee benefits side of my business, and hopefully you have a tool with which you're actually tracking your expenses and budgeting and work through. A lot of clients use QuickBooks, so I know I was kind of knocking on their self-employed version before, but we have a number of clients that work with QuickBooks. I actually do genuinely like QuickBooks itself, and we even run our own books through it as well. But one of the things that you can do there is okay, well, in this category, in this chart of account, this specific version, how much am I spending in employee benefits? And let's say you have enough budget, going back to the metric side of things. Generally speaking, if business is your side, if we're spending 10% on employee benefits, well, okay, factor that based on how much income you have, you can afford this benefit. And you can start rolling things into that, as you mentioned, of, hey, priority number one is disability insurance. And now we're going to look at the retirement plan, or now we're going to look at the life insurance, and working through what those are going to mean for you is really important. So to me, it goes back to the metric side of things, is always keeping a good pulse on where your business is in relation to a lot of other businesses, and understanding to say, oh, hey, percentage wise, my cost of goods sold, if you're selling something, is really low and my margins are very high. Or, hey, maybe I'm a service-based business and I'm able to drastically reduce some of the, compliance costs because, hey, that's a skill set that you have. I think it's one of the things to be mindful of if you need to outsource versus not. How are you stacking up against the quote unquote competition, even if it's not a very competitive market? Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. When we start to think about, ultimately what you're doing is you're saying income minus expenses is profit. And so now we're just saying that there's more profit, there's more income than there is expenses. And so we can choose what to do with these. And so with all of these, what kind of this next stage is, you've added some of these benefits and now your business keeps growing and potentially you have even more profit than you have of expenses. And so even further, what happens as a business owner is you just have to keep thinking about this. What do I do with this excess? What do I do with this now? What do I do with this now? And over time, you're adding things that you always want to have in place, but also we're going to jump kind of back to this like legal structure for businesses and how we should have things, maybe as we're starting out, or what types of businesses and kind of how this affects kind of this profit and what happens with that. Something that I hear a lot of from people, as you might be out to dinner and they might be like, oh, well, you're a business owner, you can just, why don't you pay for it? You can just write it all off. And I'm like, sure. So what they're saying is you can deduct all of this expense from your business. Okay. But somebody still has to pay for that. So you have to have the money to pay for it. And not every expense is deductible or is fully deductible. So it's not that if I spend $1, that decreases the profit in my business. So that's where it's very important to know which expenses are deductible, which expenses aren't deductible. So you've got to understand, if I spend $1 here, that's going to help with my taxes here. If I spend it here, that will help a little bit, but not as much. And so those are the important things depending on your business structure. That's what we start to talk about, is really this profit and what's left from the income minus expenses at the end of the day, once I've done all of these other things that we've talked about.
On that thread, just to make sure it's super, super clear, because I've talked to a number of people and even friends that own businesses, and this is just a hard concept to grasp, right? So just to put it really simple and clear, if I have a $50 lunch that I'm going to take some friends out to or something like that, first and foremost, it has to be a business purpose, right? You can't just be hanging around and, carrying on with your friends and stuff like that and not have a business purpose for it to even be considered a business expense. So it has to be related to your business. Steve actually has a good terminology, which is not coming to mind for me right now, of how it would actually qualify. But let's assume that it would qualify, right? And for example, let's say that lunch costs $50. Well, that would generally, and again, every situation is unique, but that would generally qualify as a tax deduction, meaning it doesn't offset your tax dollar for dollar. You're able to write that off on the income. So if you have $100 of income, well, now because of that lunch, you potentially at most could have $50 of income, 100 minus the 50. But oftentimes with meals, one of the things that's often overlooked is those are deducted differently than a lot of other expenses. If you paid for office supplies for $50, that's generally 100% deduction. But meals are a 50% deduction. So you're not even getting the $50 as a deduction. You're only getting $25. Add that on even more. The reality is that doesn't mean if your tax bill is $10, now it's going to be $5. It means it's only going to be a portion of that. So realistically, if you got the full deduction, if your tax bill was $10 and then you had this lunch, you're not dropping your tax bill by the same $50 or whatnot. You're actually dropping it by a fraction, a portion, a percentage. So in other words, don't spend the money thinking you're going to help your taxes in super well. Yeah, you're going to help your taxes to a degree, but you're still putting out a lot of money for whatever that expense is. So I'm sorry to hit that home or whatnot, but it's one of those things that I've had that discussion with a number of different people, and it's a hard concept to grasp sometimes. So,
well, that's why I think it's important just to touch on, because I think there is just kind of this misconception of like, well, business owners, you can just write it all off. That's why you would treat everyone to dinner and you would do all of this. And I'm like, oh, you still have to pay for it. So you still have to have the money first to pay for it. And then no, it's not always fully deductible. And so that's where it's just interesting, because everybody in every field has something they've heard people say that they're like, no, that's not really how it is. So this is just kind of one of these common ones. If you're going to be starting a business, you should understand to know. So I guess let's just kind of go through really quickly, just a review. Sole proprietorship is when you own a business yourself and you're just kind of maybe starting out. It's just you. A partnership, maybe there's two of you, your partners. Those two, an LLC, those three are. Explain to us kind of how these are treated tax-wise, and even as we go through to like corporation, S corp, C corp, just kind of give us a high overview of how these are taxed and how we would pay tax at the end of the year on these.
Sure. So I think I'll kind of define them as pass-through and non-pass-through entities. And all I mean to say from a pass-through perspective is, let's say you earn money from a business, regardless of the legal structure. Is that income passing through to you as the owner? And for the first batch of those, the first majority of those, the answer is yes. So this would include your sole proprietor. This would include your partnership. This would include an LLC. This would even include the LLC taxes as an S corp, and even include the corp S corp. So those are all what are called pass-through entities. Whereas the C corp, and most clients we've talked to, I'm trying to remember the last client that we had that had a C corp. But those entities actually retain those earnings, right? So for purposes of a discussion right now, we'll put that aside and just assume all of these entities are really kind of pass-through entities. If you are part of the first couple of those, whether it's the sole proprietor or the partnership, depending on how you are structured with the partnership, let's say it's you and your spouse that's running that partnership, that happens quite frequently. A lot of times those figures can just pass through on your normal tax return, So it would be a Schedule C deduction. And Steve can talk much more at length and detail than I can on this. But essentially, you have all those things that are passing through. It's still on your core tax return perspective, a 1040, right? So if you made $100 in your business, that's going to flow through to your personal return. And now you're going to report that $100 on your personal return as well. Where this starts to get complex is, let's say you have a partnership that you don't own with your spouse, or you have an LLC with multiple different members that are not your spouse, or you have an S corp. Now you're in a situation where you have, generally speaking, a completely different tax return that you have to file. So you have your 1040, which everyone files as either single, married, filing joint, or head of household. Now you also have another tax return, whether it be a partnership or potentially even a S corp return, an 1120S, that says, here, we're going to true up and add all the income or the expenses for the business. And then that return is going to spit out different schedule forms that you use on your 1040. Now, at the end of the day, the money still eventually flows through as a portion of however much you own through as a percentage basis. But there are some bits and bobs of what is the actually most tax efficient way with which to do that. That kind of alludes back to the conversation we had earlier of salary versus distribution. So long story short, most of the income you're going to get as a business owner, it's going to flow through back to your personal return, and figuring out the way with which you can do that most efficiently is something you'll have to make a determination with. So that's on the tax side. The legal side is slightly different, where you essentially just want to incorporate in a lot of respects, because if you're an S corp or even a partnership, there are situations where your own assets, let's say you're starting a business later in life and you've done a really good job of saving and building up for potential retirement, and you're starting a business. If you're a sole proprietor or a partnership, you don't necessarily have all the legal protections to, make sure your personal assets are protected. I think you had alluded to that earlier. What you would really want to start looking at doing is to incorporate. And you can incorporate as an LLC, you can incorporate as an S corp, or you can incorporate as a C corp. Again, C corp, we don't really see too many folks that are looking to do that. So kind of as a LLC or an S corp, now you're offloading all the liability risk associated with running your business, which is kind of what you're looking to do. So.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful, though, just kind of like this big picture for people who are thinking about this. They can think about, well, where would I fall? And you might start as a sole proprietor and then change. I would say this is kind of one of these big areas when you're setting up your business, like legally, tax structure. These are pieces where it does make sense to pay someone to make sure you're getting the right documents in place for whichever form you're going to set up, but then also making sure your taxes are done correctly, especially if this is an area that you say, it's not my strong suit, then you for sure want to make sure that you have someone to help you.
Yeah, the final thing I'll add there real quick, because I've seen it happen too often, of let's say you do incorporate, you're taking all the right steps. You want to offload, separate personal from business, you want to limit your liability. So you open up an LLC or you open up an S corp. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked with someone and say, are you doing your annual reports? Are you basically telling the state with which you registered, a lot of clients we work with here in Illinois, that, hey, your business is still active, you're still this and that. A lot of folks will look at us kind of ghost face, like, I didn't realize I had to do that. I was like, yeah. The reason that's important is because if your corporation, your LLC or your S corp is not active, you may not be having the liability protections that you originally set up and paid for. So that's where your annual processes are really critical to making sure that you are indeed separating your personal from your business life. So the annual reports, they only take like 5-10 minutes. Like, just make sure you're getting them done.
Yeah, and that's helpful. And I know, Trevor, that's something that you say, I can do this. If you set your business up, like all those documents with an attorney to begin with, that might be something that they actually email you every year to say, do you want me to file this for you? Okay, I just need this updated information. So if you're a person who's saying, again, this isn't my strong suit, there, a lot of times you can get those reminders. But if you're someone who says, like Trevor doesn't mind doing that and says, okay, like that's an area we can save money, I can file that. So you can, again, pick and choose. But if you work with an attorney, hopefully they'll remind you each year when that needs to be done. So So we're kind of closing up here, and there's a few, I think, just kind of overarching when we kind of almost like think back and think about now having had a business, after starting a business, there's kind of some rules of thumbs or just things that we say, you know what, in general, these are things we think of now having been in this process, and how to make the most of being a business owner. One, I know we've touched a lot on is kind of this salary versus distributions. So that's what I think we've talked enough about, but it's just, just really be sure that you're kind of setting this up. Just the rule of thumb is, what would you pay yourself out in the market to do the job that you're doing? And so that right there can get you 99% of the way in, because what you're trying to avoid in any of these is just making sure that if you were ever audited, that you're not going to have any issues. So this is why we're saying, think through these things, set them up this way so that it makes any of that much easier. And so that's something, kind of that market salary. What would I pay for me or someone else who's out there doing this job? Would they get paid? What's something else, Trevor, when you think about, how to make the most of being a business owner? Anything that comes to mind when you think of this?
Yeah, I think preparing for taxes. So we have a number of clients that have businesses and stuff like that, and a lot of times they're individually owned, so they're the primary owner. And every year, come tax time, before they started working with us, it's one of those situations where, oh, hey, I got this massive tax bill. Oh, and now I owe penalties because I didn't make enough payments throughout the year. But because these businesses are growing very quickly, your income is growing very quickly, you also need to make sure that you're paying appropriate taxes. As stinky and as not fun as it sounds, as a really good general rule of thumb is every dollar, especially as you're owning your business, every dollar that comes in, you need to be setting aside at least 15%. Potentially even 30%, depending on your circumstances, of that dollar aside for taxes. And a lot of times you need to be making payments throughout the year in order to make sure that you don't have any penalties when it comes time to file your taxes. So you just want to avoid surprises because, hey, great. It's awesome having a business to see the cash flow come in, but if you're cash strapped when you're coming to file your taxes, it's not going to be as pleasant, even though the reality is, it's really hard to say, hey, I got $100, I got to send aside, $15 or $30 of it to another account just to pay taxes. We're generally the bearers of bad news on that front, but it makes for a better client relationship come tax time. So
yeah, kind of have that heads up. I think something that I kind of think of is, go in having this mindset. You're excited to do this. If your business is doing well, the first 2 or 3 years, you might not be paying yourself, or you might just be getting to the point where you're paying yourself really what you want to. And so I would say, after that point, treat yourself like an employee, treat yourself like an owner, and actually pay yourself. Treat yourself like a professional where you're paying yourself for the job that you're doing in your business. And so as your business matures, be sure that you're saying, I should be getting paid for the work I'm doing. And so that is reflective in that salary. I think also one of the hardest things as a business owner potentially is that you could be growing this asset, this business that has value. And so someday you say, I'm going to sell it. I think one of the hardest things as a business owner is that you don't have that money in your pocket today. And so you can be growing this and you're growing something that has value, which is why you're reinvesting back into it, but you don't have that money in your pocket today. And you say, okay, well, someday I'm going to get, this is a valuation, I'm going to get X, but you don't have it now. And so it's not liquid. And I think that's something that's very hard as you work and work. Whereas a lot of people who are employees, set their money aside in 401ks, they get their employer stock and they can sell that right away and they can use it for that home renovation or whatever that is. When you're a business owner and you're building this, you're not able to sell or don't want to sell, maybe that all of that stock that you're getting that year, the value of that's increasing and then putting it in your pocket to be used. You're building something potentially for a long time, unless this is something that you're just growing and selling after a short period of time. But I think that can be one of the hard things as a business owner is, the cash flow is not reflective necessarily of the value of the business that someday if you sell it. And so those are things you need to be, watching and Trevor talks about, these key performance indicators, things that you're watching in your business to say, what's the value of my business? That's something else you can be tracking. And if it's growing over time, there will be something someday. But again, as you're doing your 401k, it just can be different. And so I think going in, knowing these things can just help to set your mind straight from the beginning.
Yeah, as you share that in terms of like the exit strategy, like down the line, whether it's 20, 30, 50, however many years, or maybe you never want to sell, but understanding what that is. I'm going to pull a line from something my dad shared with me years and years and years ago. I'm sure he grabbed it from somewhere else, but that's where I heard it. But what gets measured gets improved. And it's one of those things where you have to, as a business owner, you have to consistently measure how are you doing in these certain areas. And for us, it's also understanding what are these KPIs? What are these metrics with which you're doing well in your business? And as you're looking at the details, what's the big overarching picture, right? You've got to have a good understanding as you're running your business. Well, what is this value? In your sector, is it a multiple based on EBITDA? Is it a multiple based on revenues? Is it a multiple based on some other metric or whatnot out there? Those are the big two. And you need to track that for your own self, right? And that's something that we track internally. And for myself, I can't speak to the other partners, but I actually have tracked that since we've started. And it's really encouraging because, hey, I can see the value of my labor in this business over time, because now I see, based on what our multiple is, of what that value of the shares are, and I keep that in our budgeting system and net worth system and whatnot. So it's really helpful because in those moments, I can see my IRA or I can see my 401k, and those are really easy numbers to track. But if I'm in a rhythm that I'm tracking, what's the value of the business this month? And how did that change last month? Now it's much more encouraging and reassuring to say, well, yeah, we are going to continue to reinvest in the business. So I think the final thought I would just leave is, I alluded to it before that a lot of clients that we've seen have kind of grown wealth through ownership in certain areas. For myself personally, the business was kind of the best, I'll say, financial decision. I wouldn't say life decision. That was marrying my wife, because she does so many more things for me than I can ever imagine, and helps me keep her on the path. But as a unit, it was by far our best financial decision to go out and start a business and also merge 3 businesses into one. 5 years ago now. So yeah,
we're leaving you with like this positive of starting a business and running it and growing it can be a very exciting thing, and it can be a thing that is successful. So it is very possible. I also know the statistics of people starting businesses and them failing after year one is very high. And so as an entrepreneur, the last thing you usually need encouragement in is knowing that it's possible, because as an entrepreneur, you're like, yep, it's possible. We can do it. You're a dreamer. You're an optimist. So the last thing you usually need is more of that. You usually need these reality checks. So that's why we're kind of finishing with this. It can also be, very fulfilling, and also knowing that you're taking care of people, or you're providing a good service or a good product or something, and knowing that you're doing that and seeing that growing and seeing more people wanting that and benefiting from it. That can also be very rewarding and fulfilling in a different way than just working for someone and doing that. And so this is where everybody is different, and how they want to go about working and earning an income is different. And so that's why hopefully this is encouraging for you, or even helpful if you're saying, well, this is something I thought I wanted to do, but maybe not. But this gives you a way to think through that. So it's just, we're hearing more and more people. So hopefully this is helpful. We don't want you to learn based on trial and error. That's why you work with an advisor, so you can kind of get it right the first time, so that you don't have all these ups and downs and have these terrible stories that you have to go through along the way. So thank you so much, Trevor. This has been helpful. I appreciate all of your insight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and always happy to hop on when you need.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for listening. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. If you're someone who has questions about your financial situation and you're tired of wondering whether you have the right answers, please reach out to us. That's why we started this business, because we want to bring confidence to you and your family. So that's all for today, and we will talk to you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening. To find any links or resources related to this episode, check out our show notes. Your host was Michelle Smallenberger, a certified financial planner and CEO. The guests featured are from Financial Design Studio, a team of experienced, fiduciary, fee-only advisors based in Chicago. Anna Lewis is the executive producer of the Behind the Designs podcast. And as always, for more information about Financial Design Studio and who we are, check out our website, financialdesignstudio.com. And final note, no content discussed on this podcast should be taken as financial advice. Financial Design Studio accepts no responsibility for your individual choices. We'll see you in the next episode.